The apartment was small, so small that when his father stretched his arms in the morning, his knuckles would brush against the walls of their bedroom. The paint was peeling near the ceiling, and in winter, you could see your breath inside the kitchen. But for 7-year-old Tomasz, this tiny place on the edge of Warsaw was home. It was all he knew. His mother worked nights cleaning office buildings across the city. She would leave after dinner and come back just as the sun was rising, her hands red and cracked from the chemicals. His father worked at a factory that made car parts. He left before Tomasz woke up and came home with grease under his fingernails and exhaustion in his eyes. They never complained. Not once. They just kept going, day after day, because that is what parents do when they love their children more than they love rest. Tomasz was a quiet boy. He did not have many friends at school. The other kids thought he was strange because he would sit alone during lunch and tap his fingers on the table in patterns that made no sense to them, but they made sense to him. In his head, there was always music playing. He did not know where it came from. It was just there, like breathing. One autumn afternoon, his grandmother came to visit. She was a small woman with silver hair and hands that shook slightly when she poured tea. She had brought something with her. It was wrapped in an old blanket, and she carried it like it was something precious. She set it down on the kitchen table and pulled back the blanket. Underneath was a keyboard. Not a real piano. Just a cheap electronic keyboard, the kind you might find in a toy store. It was old and scratched. Some of the keys were yellow instead of white. His grandmother smiled and said she had found it at a flea market for almost nothing. The man selling it said it still worked. Mostly. Tomasz stared at it. He had never touched a piano before. He had only seen them in pictures, and once through the window of a music shop downtown. But something about this keyboard called to him. He reached out and pressed one key. The sound that came out was thin and tinny, not like the rich tones he had heard on the radio. But it was still a note. A real note. And it was his. That night, after his grandmother left and his parents went to bed, Tomasz sat on the floor of the living room with the keyboard in front of him. He pressed the keys one by one, listening to each sound, memorizing where each note lived. He did not know the names of the notes yet. He did not know anything about music, theory, or scales, or chords. He just played. He played until his eyes grew heavy and his mother found him asleep on the floor the next morning, his small fingers still resting on the keys. From that day on, the keyboard became his best friend. He would rush home from school and play for hours. His parents worried at first. They thought maybe he was avoiding his homework or escaping from something painful. But when they watched him play, they saw something in his face that they had never seen before. Peace, joy, purpose. The problem was that 8 of the keys did not work. They were dead, making no sound at all when pressed. So Tomasz had to learn to play around them. He would skip over the broken keys and find other ways to make the melodies he heard in his head. It was frustrating at first. Sometimes, he would bang his fists on the floor in anger. But slowly, he learned to adapt. He learned that obstacles were just puzzles, waiting to be solved. His father owned an old radio that barely worked. Most stations came through as static, but there was one that played classical music late at night. Tomasz would press his ear against the speaker and listen. That was how he first heard Chopin. He did not know the name of the piece at the time. He just knew that it made him feel something he could not put into words. It was like the music understood him. It knew about the peeling paint and the cold kitchen and the tired parents and the lonely lunches. It knew about all of it, and it turned that pain into something beautiful. He became obsessed. Every night, he would wait for the classical station to play Chopin. When it did, he would try to memorize the notes and then recreate them on his broken keyboard. It was impossibly hard. The pieces were complex, full of runs and arpeggios, and emotions that seemed too big for a child to understand. But Tomasz kept trying. Night after night, week after week, month after month. By the time he was 8, he could play 3 Chopin pieces from memory. They were not perfect. They were full of mistakes and missing notes because of the broken keys. But they were his. He had taught himself, without any help, without any lessons, without anyone telling him what to do. One day at school, his music teacher asked if anyone in the class played an instrument. A few kids raised their hands. One girl played violin. A boy played drums. Tomasz hesitated, then slowly raised his hand. The teacher looked surprised. She knew Tomasz as the quiet boy who sat alone. She asked him what he played. He said, piano. She asked if he was taking lessons somewhere. He said, no. She asked how long he had been playing. He said about a year. She smiled politely, the way adults do when they think a child is exaggerating. After class, she asked him to stay behind. There was an old upright piano in the corner of the music room. It was out of tune and missing some felt on the hammers, but it was a real piano. She asked him to play something. Tomasz sat down on the bench. The keys felt different from his keyboard. Heavier. More real. He took a breath and began to play one of the Chopin pieces he had taught himself. It was the Nocturne in E-flat major. He had heard it on the radio dozens of times and had spent months figuring it out note by note. The teacher watched with her arms crossed at first. Then her arms dropped to her sides. Then she sat down slowly in a nearby chair. When Tomasz finished, the room was completely silent. She asked him where he had learned to play like that. He told her about the keyboard his grandmother had found, about the broken keys, about the radio late at night. She shook her head slowly, like she could not believe what she was hearing. Then she said something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. She said he was talented, truly talented. But she also said that the piece he had just played was far too difficult for someone his age. She said that Chopin was for adults, for professionals who had studied for decades. She said that kids could not really play Chopin, not the way it was meant to be played. She said it kindly, almost gently, like she was trying to protect him from disappointment. Tomasz nodded and thanked her and left the room. He walked home slowly that afternoon, her words echoing in his mind. Kids cannot play Chopin. Kids cannot play Chopin. But somewhere deep inside him, in a place that the cold apartment and the broken keyboard and the tired parents could not touch, a small fire began to burn. It was not anger. It was not defiance. It was something quieter than that. It was determination. He did not say anything to anyone. He just went home and sat down at his keyboard and began to practice again. Because Tomasz had already learned something important in his 8 years of life. He had learned that sometimes the people who tell you what you cannot do are not trying to be cruel. They are just telling you what they believe. And what they believe does not have to become what you believe. That night, he made himself a promise. One day, he would play Chopin the way it was meant to be played. And everyone who ever doubted him would hear it. 2 years passed. Tomasz was 10 years old now, and the fire inside him had not gone out. If anything, it had grown stronger. Every single day, he practiced on his broken keyboard until his fingers ached and his mother had to tell him to go to bed. But even in bed, his fingers would move against the blanket, practicing silently in the dark. He had discovered the public library. It was a 20-minute walk from his apartment, but he made that walk every week without fail. The library had books about music, real books with diagrams and explanations, and sheet music printed on the pages. He would sit in the corner for hours, teaching himself to read the notes on the staff. He learned what the black dots meant, what the lines meant, what all those strange Italian words, like allegro and pianissimo, meant. The librarian noticed him. She was an older woman, with thick glasses and a soft voice. She started setting aside music books for him before he even asked. One day, she handed him a biography of Chopin. Tomasz read it in 2 days. He learned that Chopin had left his home country of Poland and never returned. He learned that Chopin had poured all his longing and sadness and love for his homeland into his music. Tomasz understood that feeling. He did not know why, but he understood it deep in his bones. But there was a problem. His keyboard was dying. More keys had stopped working. The sound was getting weaker, and sometimes it would cut out completely in the middle of a piece. He needed a real piano. He needed it desperately. But a real piano cost more money than his family made in a year, so he found other ways. The church near his apartment had an old upright piano. It was tucked in a corner near the back, and most days no one used it. Tomasz started going there after school. The priest noticed him but never said anything. He just let the boy play. The piano was badly out of tune, but Tomasz did not care. It had all 88 keys, and every single one of them worked. He also discovered that some hotels had pianos in their lobbies. Grand pianos, the kind he had only seen in pictures. One afternoon, he gathered all his courage and walked into a fancy hotel downtown. His shoes were scuffed and his jacket had a small tear in the sleeve, but he walked in like he belonged there. He sat down at the grand piano in the lobby and started to play. The hotel staff watched him with confused expressions. A manager came over and asked if he was a guest. Tomasz said no. The manager asked him to leave, but before Tomasz could stand up, an old man sitting nearby raised his hand and said to let the boy finish. The manager hesitated, then stepped back. Tomasz played for 10 more minutes. When he finished, the old man walked over and pressed a folded bill into his hand. It was more money than Tomasz had ever held. He gave it to his mother that night. She cried. Word began to spread. People in the neighborhood started talking about the factory worker's son who played piano like a professional. The story was strange enough to catch attention. A boy with no lessons, no teacher, no proper instrument, playing Chopin like he had been born with the music already inside him. One evening in late spring, Tomasz was at the church, practicing as usual. He was working on Chopin's Ballade. No one. The same piece his school teacher had told him was impossible for a child. He had been learning it for over a year, measure by measure, phrase by phrase. It was the hardest thing he had ever attempted. Some sections made him want to give up, but he never did. He was so focused that he did not notice the woman standing at the back of the church. She had been walking home from work when she heard the music through an open window. She had stopped. She had listened, and then she had come inside to see who was playing. Her name was Mrs. Nowak. She was a piano teacher. Not just any piano teacher, but one of the most respected in Warsaw. She had trained students who had gone on to win competitions and perform in concert halls across Europe. She had heard thousands of young pianists in her career, but she had never heard anything quite like this. She waited until Tomasz finished. Then she walked up to him and asked his name. He told her. She asked who his teacher was. He said he did not have one. She asked where he had learned to play. He told her about the keyboard, the library books, the church piano, the hotel lobbies. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she was quiet for a long moment. Then, she said she wanted to teach him. She said she would not charge any money. She said she had been teaching for 30 years, and she had never made an offer like this to anyone. But there was something in his playing that she could not ignore. Something rare. Something that deserved to be nurtured. Tomasz did not know what to say. He just nodded. His eyes filling with tears he tried hard to hide. For the next 2 years, Mrs. Nowak became like a second grandmother to him. She was strict. She demanded perfection. She would make him play the same passage 50 times until every note was exactly right. But she also believed in him. She told him he had a gift. She told him he could do things that most pianists only dreamed of. And for the first time in his life, Tomasz had someone in his corner who truly understood what he was capable of. On his 12th birthday, Mrs. Nowak sat him down and told him something that made his heart stop. There was an audition coming up. The Friedrich Chopin Institute, the most prestigious music academy in all of Poland, was holding tryouts for their young talent program. Only the best young pianists in the country were invited. Students who got in received full scholarships, world-class training, and access to instruments and resources that Tomasz could only imagine. She had submitted a recording of his playing without telling him. And he had been invited to audition. Tomasz felt dizzy. This was the kind of opportunity that came once in a lifetime. But it was also terrifying. The students who auditioned for this program came from wealthy families. They had been taking lessons since they were 3 years old. They had parents who were musicians, grandparents who were musicians. They had everything that Tomasz did not have. The audition was in 6 weeks. Mrs. Nowak told him they would prepare the most ambitious program possible. They would show the judges something they had never seen before. She asked him what he wanted to play. Read. He did not hesitate. He said Chopin's Ballade, no. 1. She looked at him for a long time. The piece was 12 minutes long. It was considered one of the most technically and emotionally demanding works in the entire piano repertoire. Professional adults struggled with it, and here was a 12-year-old boy, self-taught for most of his life, saying he wanted to play it for the most important audition of his existence. She smiled. She said she would not have expected anything less. For 6 weeks, Tomasz practiced like his life depended on it. Because, in a way, it did. This was his one chance. His one shot at a different future. He practiced until his fingers bled. He practiced until he could play the piece with his eyes closed. He practiced until every note was burned into his memory so deeply that nothing could shake it loose. The day of the audition arrived. His mother had borrowed a suit jacket from a neighbor. It was too big for him. The sleeves hung past his wrists, and the shoulders drooped. But it was the best they could do. His father took the day off work for the first time in years to accompany him to the institute. When they arrived, Tomasz saw the other candidates. They wore expensive clothes. They carried themselves with confidence. Their parents chatted with each other about summer music camps in Vienna and private lessons with famous teachers. Tomasz stood in the corner with his father, who did not know what to say to any of these people. The audition room was large and cold. 5 judges sat behind a long table. They looked serious and important. When Tomasz walked in, one of them glanced at his borrowed jacket and whispered something to the judge beside her. Another checked his paperwork and raised an eyebrow when he saw that Tomasz had no formal training listed. They asked him to play something. He said he had prepared Chopin's Ballade. No. 1. The room went silent. One judge leaned back in her chair. Another one almost smiled, but not in a kind way. They did not believe him. They thought this poor boy in his oversized jacket was about to embarrass himself. Tomasz sat down at the grand piano. It was the most beautiful instrument he had ever seen. His hands were trembling. He could feel the doubt in the room pressing down on him like a weight. He closed his eyes. He thought about his grandmother and the keyboard. He thought about his mother's cracked hands and his father's tired eyes. He thought about Mrs. Nowak and all those hours of practice. He thought about every person who had ever told him what he could not do. Then he opened his eyes and began to play. The first note floated into the silence like a question. Soft, gentle, searching for something that could not be named. Tomasz did not look at the judges. He did not look at anything. His eyes were fixed on some distant point beyond the piano, beyond the room, beyond everything. The opening of Chopin's Ballade. No. 1 is deceptively simple. Just a few notes. Slow and tender, like someone beginning to tell a story they have kept hidden for a long time. But those simple notes contain everything. They contain longing. They contain memory. They contain the weight of words that were never spoken. Tomasz played them like he had lived them. The judges shifted in their seats. The one who had whispered earlier uncrossed her arms. The one who had almost smiled was not smiling anymore. Something was happening that none of them had expected. The music began to build. The gentle opening gave way to something more urgent, more passionate. Tomasz's fingers moved across the keys with a precision that seemed impossible for someone his age. But it was not just precision. It was feeling. Every note meant something. Every phrase had a purpose. He was not just playing the music. He was speaking through it. In the back of the room, Tomasz's father stood with his hands clasped together. He did not understand classical music. He had never been to a concert in his life. But he understood his son, and watching Tomasz at that piano, he understood that something extraordinary was happening. His boy, his quiet little boy who used to fall asleep on the floor with his fingers on a broken keyboard, was becoming something more than any of them had ever imagined. The middle section of the ballade is where most pianists struggle. The technical demands are brutal. Rapid passages that require both hands to move in perfect coordination. Leaps across the keyboard that leave no room for error. Runs so fast that one wrong note can send everything crashing down. This is where the judges expected the boy to fail. This is where reality would catch up with his ambition. But Tomasz did not fail. His hands flew across the keys like they had been born there. The difficult passages that had taken professional pianists years to master poured out of him with a fluency that defied explanation. One of the judges leaned forward, her mouth slightly open. Another one had taken off his glasses and was rubbing his eyes, like he could not believe what he was seeing. But it was not the technical brilliance that truly stunned them. It was the emotion. Chopin had written this piece after leaving Poland, knowing he would never return. He had poured all his grief and anger and desperate love for his homeland into these notes. And somehow, this 12-year-old boy from a cold apartment on the edge of Warsaw understood that grief. He understood it because he had felt something like it his whole life. The grief of wanting something you could not have. The grief of being told you were not good enough. The grief of watching your parents work themselves to the bone and knowing there was nothing you could do to help. All of that came out in the music. The final section of the ballade is a storm. The tempo increases. The dynamics swell. Everything that has been building throughout the piece explodes into a cascade of sound that is both devastating and beautiful. It is the moment where Chopin stops holding back. It is the moment where everything is released. Tomasz played it like he was setting something free. His whole body moved with the music now. His shoulders, his arms, even his head swaying slightly with the rhythm. He was not performing anymore. He was not thinking about the judges or the audition or what might happen next. He was simply inside the music, completely and totally, like nothing else in the world existed. The final chords rang out, powerful and conclusive. Then, silence. Tomasz lifted his hands from the keys. For a moment, he just sat there, breathing hard, his heart pounding in his chest. Then, slowly, he turned to face the judges. No one moved. No one spoke. The room was so quiet that Tomasz could hear his own heartbeat. Then he saw something that he would never forget. The judge at the end of the table, a woman with gray hair and sharp eyes who had performed at the greatest concert halls in the world, had tears running down her cheeks. She was not trying to hide them. She was not embarrassed. She just sat there with tears streaming down her face, looking at this boy in his borrowed jacket, like she was seeing a ghost. She whispered something to the judge beside her. He nodded slowly. Then she stood up. For a terrible moment, Tomasz thought he had done something wrong. Maybe he had broken some rule. Maybe they were going to ask him to leave. His stomach tightened with fear. But the woman did not ask him to leave. Instead, she started to clap. One by one, the other judges joined her. Then someone in the back of the room started clapping too. Tomasz turned and saw his father, tears in his eyes, clapping harder than anyone. Within seconds, everyone in the room was applauding. It was not polite applause. It was not the kind of clapping you do because you are supposed to. It was real. It was from the heart. Tomasz did not know what to do. He had never experienced anything like this. He just stood there, his hands shaking, his eyes burning. feeling like the whole world had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. After the applause died down, the gray-haired judge walked over to him. She knelt down so that her eyes were level with his. She asked him how long he had been playing. He told her about the keyboard, the church piano, Mrs. Nowak. She listened to every word. Then she shook her head slowly and said that in 35 years of judging auditions, she had never heard anyone play like that. Child or adult. Trained or untrained. She said he had something that could not be taught. Something that came from somewhere deep inside that no amount of lessons could create. She told him he was accepted into the program, but that was not all. She said they were giving him a full scholarship. Everything would be paid for. Tuition, books, everything. And she said something else. Something that made Tomasz's heart nearly stop. They were giving him access to a private practice room. A room with a Steinway grand piano. The finest piano in the world. And it would be his to use, whenever he wanted. Tomasz could not speak. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He just stood there, nodding, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. When he walked out of the audition room, his father was waiting. The big man who had worked in a factory his whole life, who had never cried in front of his son, wrapped his arms around Tomasz and held him tight. He did not say anything. He did not need to. They just stood there, father and son, holding on to each other in the hallway of the most prestigious music institute in Poland. That night, they celebrated with a special dinner. His mother had saved a little money for the occasion, hoping for good news. When Tomasz told her what had happened, she covered her face with her hands and sobbed. Happy tears. Relieved tears. The tears of a mother who had watched her son struggle and sacrifice and refuse to give up. His grandmother came over too. She brought the old keyboard, the one she had found at the flea market all those years ago. By now, almost half the keys were dead. The sound was barely audible, but she set it on the table and said she wanted to keep it forever. It was where everything had started. It was proof that miracles could grow from broken things. Before he went to bed that night, Tomasz sat alone in his room. He thought about his music teacher from years ago, the one who had told him that kids could not play Chopin. He wondered if she had heard about what happened today. He wondered if she remembered him. At all. He was not angry at her. He understood now that she had only been trying to protect him from disappointment. She had not known what he was capable of. Neither had anyone else. Neither had he, really. He looked out his window at the city lights and made himself another promise. This was just the beginning. He had proven that a kid could play Chopin. Now he was going to prove what else was possible. He was going to work harder than anyone. He was going to become so good that no one would ever doubt him again. The fire inside him burned brighter than ever. The first few months at the institute felt like a dream. Tomasz would wake up early every morning just to make sure it was real. He would walk through the grand hallways with their high ceilings and polished floors, past the portraits of famous composers, past the practice rooms where the sound of pianos filled the air like birdsong. And every day, he would pinch himself because he still could not believe he belonged here. His practice room became his sanctuary. It was small, just big enough for the piano and a wooden chair. But inside that room sat a Steinway grand piano, the most beautiful instrument he had ever touched. The keys were smooth and perfectly weighted. The sound was rich and warm and full. Every note rang out with a clarity that made his old keyboard seem like a distant memory. He would sit there for hours, sometimes forgetting to eat, losing himself completely in the music. But slowly, the dream began to show its cracks. The other students at the institute were different from anyone Tomasz had ever known. They came from families where music was not a hobby but a legacy. Their parents were concert pianists, orchestra conductors, music professors. They had grown up with grand pianos in their living rooms. They had spent summers at music camps in Vienna and Paris. They spoke casually about masterclasses with teachers whose names Tomasz had only read in books. And they noticed him. The boy who did not belong. It started with small things. whispers in the hallways that stopped when he walked by, looks exchanged between students when he entered a room. One day, he overheard two boys talking outside his practice room. One of them said that Tomasz was just a charity case, a feel-good story the institute was using for publicity. The other one laughed and said that talent only took you so far. Without proper training and background, he would fade away like all the others. Tomasz pretended he had not heard. But the words stayed with him. They burrowed into his mind and made a home there, right next to all the other doubts he had tried so hard to bury. He worked harder to prove them wrong. He practiced longer hours than anyone else. He arrived first and left last. He pushed himself until his fingers cramped and his back ached from sitting at the piano. But no matter how hard he worked, he could not shake the feeling that he was an outsider, that he was fooling everyone, including himself. Then came the news that changed everything. He was 14 years old when his teacher called him into her office. She told him that he had been selected to represent the institute at the International Young Pianists Competition in Moscow. It was one of the most prestigious competitions in the world for musicians under 18. Hundreds of young pianists from dozens of countries would compete, the best of the best. And Tomasz had been chosen. His first reaction was joy, pure, overwhelming joy. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. A chance to prove himself on the biggest stage imaginable. But then, the pressure started. Suddenly, everyone was watching him. Journalists wanted to interview him. They called him the miracle boy, the prodigy from nowhere, the factory worker's son who played like a master. They wrote stories about his broken keyboard and his grandmother and his journey from poverty to prestige. They turned his life into a fairy tale. Tomasz hated it. He did not want to be a story. He just wanted to play music. But the more he tried to focus on his practice, the more the outside world intruded. Sponsors started calling. The institute's administration scheduled press events and photo sessions. His face appeared in newspapers and on television. Everyone had expectations. Everyone was waiting to see if the miracle was real. The weight of it pressed down on him like a stone. He started having trouble sleeping. He would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing through everything that could go wrong. What if he forgot the notes? What if his hands trembled? What if he got on that stage in Moscow and proved that all those whispers were right? That he was just a charity case who had gotten lucky? His hands began to shake. Not all the time, just before performances. During practice sessions, observed by teachers. During the mock competitions the institute held to prepare students. His fingers, which had always been so steady and sure, would tremble uncontrollably. He would make mistakes he had never made before. Simple passages became obstacles. Familiar pieces felt foreign. Mrs. Nowak noticed. She came to visit him one weekend and saw immediately that something was wrong. She sat with him and listened as he tried to explain what was happening. The fear, the doubt, the feeling that he was carrying something too heavy for his shoulders. She told him that every great artist faced moments like this. She told him that pressure was the price of ambition. She told him to trust himself. See, and he tried. He really tried. The day of the competition arrived. Tomasz flew to Moscow with his teacher and a small delegation from the institute. The competition venue was enormous. A grand concert hall with thousands of seats and chandeliers that sparkled like stars. Backstage, he saw the other competitors. They looked calm and confident. They stretched their fingers and chatted with their coaches like this was just another day. Tomasz stood alone in a corner, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He made it through the first round. His performance was not perfect, but it was good enough to advance. The second round went better. He played Chopin's Scherzo No. 2, a piece full of fire and passion, and for a few minutes he forgot about the pressure and just let the music carry him. The audience applauded warmly. The judges nodded with approval. He was going to the semi-finals. That night, he could not sleep at all. He lay in his hotel bed, watching the hours tick by, his mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. He thought about his parents back home, watching on television, hoping and praying. He thought about his grandmother, who had given him that broken keyboard. He thought about everyone who had believed in him and everyone who had doubted him. The weight of all those expectations crushed against his chest. The semifinals were the next afternoon. Tomasz walked onto the stage in front of 2,000 people. The lights were bright and hot. The piano gleamed under the spotlights. He sat down and placed his hands on the keys. They were trembling. He began to play Chopin's Scherzo No. 2. The same piece he had played so beautifully just 2 days before. The opening notes rang out strong and clear. He felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it would be okay. Maybe he could push through. Then it happened. Halfway through the piece, his mind went blank. Completely and totally blank. One moment he was playing, and the next moment he had no idea what came next. His fingers froze. The music stopped. The hall fell into a terrible silence. 2,000 people stared at him. The judges stared at him. Cameras pointed at him, broadcasting his failure to the entire world. Tomasz sat there for what felt like an eternity. He tried to remember the notes. He tried to find his way back into the music. But there was nothing. Just emptiness. Just silence. Just the sound of his own breathing and the pounding of his heart. After 15 seconds that felt like 15 years, he stood up. He bowed to the audience, and he walked off the stage. Backstage, he collapsed into a chair and buried his face in his hands. His teacher rushed over, trying to comfort him, but he could not hear her words. He could not hear anything except the roaring in his own head. The sound of everything falling apart. The headlines came quickly. Prodigy crumbles under pressure. Miracle Boy's dream ends in silence. Was the hype real? They were everywhere. In newspapers, on websites, on television, everyone had an opinion. Everyone had something to say about the boy who had frozen on the biggest stage of his life. When Tomasz returned home, he went straight to his room. He did not talk to his parents. He did not call Mrs. Nowak. He just sat on his bed, staring at the wall, feeling emptier than he had ever felt in his life. 3 days later, he told his mother that he was done with piano. He said he never wanted to play again. She tried to argue, tried to encourage him, but he would not listen. He had made up his mind. The fire inside him had finally gone out. 8 months passed. 8 months without music. 8 months of silence. Tomasz went back to his old school. He tried to be normal. He woke up, went to class, came home, did his homework, went to sleep. He avoided anything that reminded him of piano. When classical music played on the radio, he left the room. When he walked past the church where he used to practice, he crossed to the other side of the street. When his mother mentioned the institute or Mrs. Nowak, he changed the subject. But music does not let go so easily. It followed him everywhere. He heard it in the rhythm of rain against his window. He heard it in the footsteps of people walking down the street. He heard it in the silence of his own room late at night when sleep would not come. His fingers would move sometimes without him realizing, tapping out melodies on his desk, on his leg, on the edge of his bed. The music was still inside him. It had not died. It was just waiting. His parents did not know what to do. They watched their son fade a little more each day. The light that used to shine in his eyes was gone. The boy who had practiced until midnight, who had dreamed of concert halls and standing ovations, now spent his evenings staring at the television with empty eyes. They tried talking to him. They tried giving him space. Nothing worked. Mrs. Nowak came to visit once. She sat with him for an hour, talking about everything, except piano. She told him stories about her own failures, her own moments of doubt. She said that every artist breaks at some point. The question is not whether you will break. The question is what you will do with the broken pieces. Tomasz listened politely, but said nothing. When she left, he went back to his room and closed the door. Then his grandmother got sick. It happened suddenly. 1 week she was fine, and the next week she was in the hospital. The doctors said her heart was weak. They said she needed rest. They said the family should prepare themselves. Tomasz visited her every day after school. He would sit beside her bed and hold her hand, which had grown thin and fragile. She would smile at him and ask about his day, and he would make up stories to keep her from worrying. He told her school was fine. He told her he was happy. He told her everything was okay. She knew he was lying. She always knew. One afternoon, about a week before his 15th birthday, she asked everyone else to leave the room. She wanted to talk to her grandson alone. When they were by themselves, she reached under her pillow and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. She handed it to him. It was an old photograph, black and white, worn at the edges. It showed a man sitting at a piano, his head bowed, his fingers resting on the keys. Tomasz recognized the face immediately. It was Chopin. His grandmother told him she had kept this photograph for 60 years. Her own mother had given it to her when she was a young girl. She said that Chopin had suffered more than most people could imagine. He had been forced to leave his homeland and watch from afar as everything he loved was destroyed. He had lost friends. He had lost his health. He had spent most of his life in exile, alone and sick, longing for a home he would never see again. But he never stopped playing. Even when his body was failing. Even when his heart was broken. Even when the world gave him every reason to give up. He played. Because the music was bigger than his pain. He played. Because it was the only way he knew how to survive. She looked at Tomasz with those sharp eyes that had always seen right through him. She said that he had failed once. So what? Everyone fails. Failure is not the end of the story. It is just a chapter. The question is not whether you will fail. The question is whether you will let failure be your final note. She pressed the photograph into his hands and told him to keep it. Then she closed her eyes and said she was tired. Tomasz sat there for a long time, looking at the photograph, thinking about everything she had said. That night, he went home and did something he had not done in 8 months. He sat down at the old keyboard. The one his grandmother had found at the flea market all those years ago. Most of the keys did not work anymore. The sound was barely a whisper. But he placed his fingers on the keys and began to play. It was clumsy at first. His fingers had forgotten their strength. The music came out broken and halting. But he kept going, note by note, measure by measure, hour by hour. He played until his hands cramped. He played until the sun came up. He played until the music inside him finally found its voice again. His grandmother passed away 3 weeks later. Tomasz played at her funeral. He played Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor, the saddest and most beautiful piece he knew. He played it for her. He played it for everyone who had ever loved him. He played it for himself. After the funeral, something changed in him. The fear was still there. The doubt was still there. But there was something else now, too. A quiet understanding that had not existed before. He understood now that music was not about proving anything. It was not about competitions or headlines or the approval of judges. It was about truth. It was about taking everything inside you, all the joy and pain and hope and grief, and turning it into something beautiful. He went back to the institute. He apologized to his teachers for disappearing. He asked if he could return. They said, yes. They had been waiting for him. 1 year later, Tomasz entered the junior Chopin competition in Warsaw. It was held in the same concert hall where the great Chopin himself had once performed. The competition was fierce. Pianists from all over the world had come to compete. Many of them had been training their whole lives for this moment. Tomasz was not nervous this time. He was not afraid. He had already experienced the worst thing that could happen. He had frozen on stage in front of the whole world. He had read the headlines. He had felt the shame. And he had survived. There was nothing left to fear. When his turn came, he walked onto the stage with calm steps. The piano waited for him like an old friend. He sat down and looked out at the audience. Somewhere in the crowd, his parents were watching. His teachers were watching. The spirit of his grandmother was watching. He chose to play Chopin's Ballade. No one. The same piece he had played at his first audition. The same piece that had changed his life. But this time, it was different. This time, he was not trying to impress anyone. He was not trying to prove that kids could play Chopin. He was simply telling the truth. His truth. The truth of a boy who had been told he could not do something and had spent his whole life proving that he could. When he finished, the silence lasted only a moment. Then, the audience erupted. People stood from their seats. They cheered. They clapped until their hands hurt. Some of them cried. It was not just applause. It was recognition. It was the sound of 2,000 people witnessing something they would never forget. He won first place. Unanimously. Today, Tomasz is considered one of the finest Chopin interpreters of his generation. He has performed in concert halls around the world. But his greatest pride is not the awards or the fame. It is the foundation he started to provide free music lessons to children from poor families. Children like him. Children who have talent but no opportunity. Children who have been told what they cannot do. Every scholarship letter his foundation sends out ends with the same words. Kids can play Chopin. Kids can play anything. All they need is someone who believes in them. Even if that someone is themselves.